everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You guys chose this topic for us. So today we're diving into ego.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and our main source is Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy.
Right.
But we're also going to kind of weave in some other stuff too,
Well,
like historical examples and stories of people who either mastered their ego or, let it destroy them.
oh, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating how this one concept, ego, plays a role in every single stage of our lives.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter whether we're, striving for something or experiencing success.
Right.
Or, even facing failure. Like, ego can be our biggest cheerleader.
Totally.
Or our worst enemy.
Yeah, it can really make or break us.
So let's start with, aspiration.
Okay.
Today there's just this huge emphasis on following your passion. But some of the sources that you sent me suggest that maybe we've overlooked something crucial in all this.
It's interesting you say that because there's this ancient advice from Isocrates to this young guy named Demonicus.
Okay.
And it's all about prioritizing things like modesty and self-control.
Oh.
And sound judgment. And it's not just some ancient wisdom either. Shakespeare echoes this in Hamlet too.
Wow.
With Polonius giving similar advice to Laertes.
So instead of just blindly chasing passion, there's this idea of laying a strong foundation first.
Exactly.
That makes me think of General William Tecumseh Sherman.
Interesting.
I know he was a famous Civil War general.
Yeah.
But how does he fit into this conversation about ego?
So Sherman is a fantastic example of ambition without ego.
Okay.
He was incredibly dedicated to his craft, rising slowly through the ranks, always seeking to learn and improve. But what's fascinating is that he actively avoided promotions at times.
Wait, really?
Yeah, he even requested not to be in command, despite being qualified.
Why would he do that?
Because he understood the dangers of ego.
Yeah.
He knew that premature recognition could, inflate his sense of self-importance and distract him from the real work.
Right.
By staying grounded and focusing on mastery.
Yeah.
He built genuine respect, and he avoided the pitfalls of letting early success go to his head.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
I wonder if sometimes slowing down like Sherman did could actually help us achieve more in the long run.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's about focusing on building a solid foundation of knowledge and expertise before striving for, recognition or leadership roles.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable insight. It connects back to the idea of prioritizing self-control and sound judgment over just blindly following your passion.
Right.
And this leads us to another important point, the danger of talk as a substitute for action.
Oh, this is so relatable.
Yeah.
I know I've been guilty of this, talking about my goals and plans, as if talking about them is the same as achieving them.
Right. It's a common trap. Especially in the age of social media where we're constantly bombarded with messages about, hustling and crushing it.
Yeah.
Ego loves to talk about results, accolades, attention.
Oh, yeah.
But real progress happens in the quiet, often unglamorous work.
Right.
Behind the scenes.
So it's about doing the work, not just talking about it.
Exactly.
But how do we actually resist that urge to talk and seek validation, especially when it feels like everyone around us is promoting themselves,
Yeah, this is where understanding the psychology of ego is helpful.
Okay.
Ryan Holiday talks about the concept of performative busyness.
Okay.
Where we use talking about our goals as a way to avoid the discomfort of real work.
Oh.
It's we're trying to convince ourselves and others that we're making progress, even if we're not actually taking any concrete steps.
So next time I find myself over-explaining my plans, I should ask myself, am I seeking validation or am I truly committed to taking action?
Exactly. That's a great question to ask yourself.
That's a really helpful takeaway.
Good.
And this connects to another fascinating idea from the sources you shared.
Okay.
Specifically from John Boyd, the influential military strategist.
Okay.
He talks about the choice between being somebody versus doing something.
I like that.
I'm curious, what exactly does he mean by that?
Well,
It feels very relevant today with everyone focused on personal branding and building a platform.
yeah, so Boyd argues that being somebody is about seeking status titles, external validation.
Okay.
It's about the appearance of success.
Mm-hmm.
Doing something, on the other hand, is about making a real difference.
Okay.
Regardless of recognition or accolades,
Mm-hmm.
it's about staying true to your values
Yeah.
and working towards a meaningful goal, even if it means staying behind the scenes.
So it's about choosing substance over style.
Yeah.
Real impact over superficial markers of success.
Exactly.
That makes me think of the canvas strategy that Holiday talks about.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
The canvas strategy is a great example of how we can subsume our ego to help others succeed, while also making ourselves indispensable in the process.
That sounds counterintuitive.
It is.
How does that work
So
exactly?
think about Benjamin Franklin early in his career.
Oh, yeah.
He submitted articles anonymously mastering his craft and influencing public opinion
Wow.
while letting others take the credit.
Wow.
He focused on becoming an invaluable asset, a linchpin, rather than seeking personal fame.
That's amazing. And it reminds me of another example.
Okay.
Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots.
Yeah.
He spent years mastering the unglamorous task of film analysis,
Right.
providing insights that were often attributed to senior coaches.
Right.
He built his reputation on expertise and contribution, not on self-promotion.
Both Franklin and Belichick understood that true value comes from making a real difference,
Right.
not from being the center of attention.
Yeah.
They were masters of the canvas strategy, working behind the scenes to create something truly impactful.
So instead of worrying about who gets the credit, we should focus on becoming indispensable, on contributing our unique skills and talents to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly.
That's a really powerful idea, especially for someone like me who's just starting out in their career.
It's a valuable lesson for anyone at any stage of their journey. And it leads us to another crucial aspect of managing ego,
Okay.
especially when we're striving for something challenging,
Oh.
managing our temperament.
Oh, that makes me think of Jackie Robinson breaking baseball's color barrier.
Oh, yeah.
It must have taken incredible courage to face the racism and abuse he encountered,
Yeah.
but he did it with such grace and dignity.
And that grace and dignity were essential to his success. Branch, Ricky, the Dodgers manager who signed Robinson,
Right.
specifically looked for a player with the guts not to fight back against the inevitable racism and abuse.
That phrase, the guts not to fight back.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
It is.
It highlights how sometimes restraint is the most courageous act.
Absolutely.
Robinson understood that reacting impulsively, letting his ego get the better of him, would have undermined his mission.
Yeah.
He focused on the larger goal, on breaking down barriers and paving the way for others.
It's a powerful example of how mastering our emotions,
Yeah.
especially in the face of adversity,
Right.
can be crucial to achieving our goals.
It reminds us that sometimes the wisest battle is the one fought within ourselves,
Yeah.
against our own ego's urge to react defensively or lash out when we feel attacked or challenged.
Exactly.
But it's important to note that Robinson did eventually become more assertive later in his career, right?
Right.
It wasn't about suppressing his voice entirely.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's a nuanced point. Robinson strategically chose when to speak out.
Yeah.
After he had secured his position and earned the respect of his teammates and fans,
Right.
he understood that timing and strategy are important when challenging the status quo.
So it's not about being passive. It's about choosing our battles wisely,
Yeah.
making sure our actions align with our values and our ultimate goals.
Precisely. And this brings us to another challenge that can arise during the aspiration phase.
Okay.
The danger of becoming too self-absorbed.
Self-absorbed.
Yeah.
How does that play into this?
Well, Ryan Holiday uses fictional characters like Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye as examples.
Okay.
These characters are so fixated on themselves,
Right.
their own insecurities and perceived flaws,
Right.
that they miss opportunities for real connection and growth.
It's like they're living in their own heads.
Exactly.
Creating these narratives about themselves that may not even be true.
Yeah, and this can happen in real life too.
Right.
We can get so caught up in our internal monologues, both positive and negative,
Yeah.
that we lose sight of what's actually happening around us.
Right.
We miss opportunities to learn to collaborate and to make a real impact.
This reminds me of the story about General George C. Marshall, who refused to keep a diary during World War II. He worried that writing about his experiences would distort his decision-making,
Oh, wow.
make him too self-conscious.
That's a remarkable example of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Marshall understood that even our most private thoughts can be influenced by ego.
Right.
He wanted to stay focused on the task at hand, on serving something larger than himself, rather than getting caught up in his own internal narrative.
So it's not just about managing our external behavior.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating an internal environment that's conducive to clear thinking and sound judgment. It's about silencing that inner critic,
Right.
but also that inner cheerleader so we can be more present and receptive to the world around us.
Exactly. And speaking of being present and focused,
Okay.
this brings us to one of the most fundamental yet often overlooked aspects of achieving our aspirations.
Okay.
Hard work.
Okay, back to basics.
You got it.
Yeah.
No shortcuts, right?
Ego wants to believe in talent, genius, inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
Or wants to find the easy path, the quick fix.
Yeah. But true accomplishment requires dedication, persistence, and a willingness to embrace the grind.
I love that quote from Edgar Degas. It's not with ideas, but with words that one makes verse.
That's good.
We can have all the passion and talent in the world.
Yeah.
But without consistent effort and execution, those ideas will remain just that, ideas.
And Henry Ford famously said, you can't build a reputation on what you're going to do.
Right.
Action speaks louder than words.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to silencing the doubts and anxieties of our own ego.
This reminds me of Kirk Hammett, the guitarist for Metallica.
Oh, yeah.
He actually took guitar lessons after joining the band.
Really?
He was already a rock star, but he still wanted to learn and improve.
That's a perfect example of resisting complacency.
Yeah.
Hammett didn't let success go to his head.
Right.
He understood that mastery is an ongoing process, that there's always room for improvement no matter how much you've already achieved.
It's a great reminder that we should never stop learning, never stop pushing ourselves to get better.
And it's a powerful antidote to ego.
Yeah.
Which often wants to believe it has arrived, that it already knows everything.
So the key takeaway here is to embrace the process.
Yeah.
Resist the temptation to seek validation or shortcuts.
Right.
And focus on the work knowing that the results will follow.
Exactly. And that brings us to the end of our exploration of ego in the aspiration phase.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the importance of self-control and sound judgment, to the dangers of talk, self-absorption, and neglecting hard work.
Right.
But what happens when we actually achieve our goals?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that success doesn't become ego's breeding ground?
Right.
That's something we'll dive into in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we're back, and we're diving deeper into ego.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think that even after we've, managed to keep our ego in check during that aspiration phase,
Right.
success itself can present a whole new set of challenges.
Absolutely.
Right.
Success often brings with it a whole new wave of temptations, distractions,
Yeah.
and even pitfalls, especially when ego enters the picture.
So what's the first hurdle we need to overcome when it comes to handling success gracefully?
Well, one common trap is the tendency to create a narrative around our success.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like we rewrite history in a way that inflates our own role and minimizes luck or the contributions of others.
I can see that it's tempting to believe that we had it all figured out from the start,
Right.
that our success was inevitable.
Exactly. And that's why Bill Walsh's story is so instructive.
Okay.
He took the San Francisco 49ers from being the worst team in football to Super Bowl champions in just a few years.
Wow.
A remarkable achievement, no doubt.
It would be easy to claim it was all part of some grand master plan.
And yet Walsh consistently resisted that temptation.
Really?
He acknowledged the role of luck, the hard work of his team, and the contributions of others. Instead of focusing on a grand vision, he emphasized what he called the standard of performance,
Okay.
a set of small, consistent actions that ultimately led to victory.
So it wasn't about some grand vision, but rather the daily grind, the commitment to excellence in every detail.
Precisely.
Wow.
And what's even more remarkable is that he didn't have a specific timeline for winning the Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
He understood that success is a process, not a destination.
That's a powerful reminder for all of us.
It is.
To stay present, to focus on the work itself,
Yeah.
rather than getting caught up in some imagined future narrative.
And it's a powerful antidote to ego, which often wants to take all the credit and bask in the glory.
But what about when success does come?
Yeah.
How do we avoid becoming complacent and resting on our laurels?
That's another danger zone. Success can breed a sense of entitlement, a belief that we've earned the right to relax and coast on our past achievements.
It's understandable you work hard, you achieve something great. It's natural to want to reward yourself.
Of course. But that's where ego can lead us astray. It whispers in our ear telling us we're special, that we deserve special treatment.
And that can lead to a dangerous spiral of self-indulgence and a loss of focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can see this play out in several historical examples. Take Ulysses S. Grant, for instance. After his incredible success as a general, during the Civil War, he became president.
Yes, I know the story.
But his presidency was marred by scandals and a sense of entitlement, which ultimately led to his financial ruin.
So even someone who achieved greatness on the battlefield could fall prey to the temptations of ego after achieving success.
It's a cautionary tale. Grant's story shows how ego can lead to complacency, to trusting the wrong people, and to a need to maintain a certain lifestyle that ultimately becomes unsustainable.
It makes you think about the trappings of success, the pressure to keep up appearances, to live up to a certain image.
And that pressure can be immense, especially when ego is calling the shots.
It's almost as if we become addicted to the validation, to the external markers of success.
Yes, and that addiction can be just as destructive as any other.
So how do we break free from that cycle? How do we maintain our drive and find contentment even after achieving success?
One important step is to manage our expectations. We need to understand that success is not a linear path, that there will be ups and downs, setbacks along the way.
So it's about embracing the journey, not just fixating on the destination.
Exactly, and it's about remembering that success is not a zero-sum game. Someone else's achievement doesn't diminish our own.
It seems like ego often leads us to compare ourselves to others, to feel envious or inadequate when someone else is doing well.
And that envy can be incredibly toxic. It distracts us from our own path, from our own priorities.
So the key is to stay focused on our own goals, to celebrate our own accomplishments without getting caught up in the comparison game.
Yes, and it's about remembering that true fulfillment comes from the work itself, not from external validation.
That's a great reminder. We've talked about the dangers of crafting a narrative around our success, the trap of entitlement, and the importance of managing envy.
Right.
These are all internal battles we face.
They are indeed.
Yeah.
But what about the external challenges? How does ego manifest in our interactions with others, especially when we're in a position of power?
That's an interesting question. How does success combined with ego impact the way we lead and interact with others?
Well, ego can lead to a need for control,
Okay.
to micromanaging, to a belief that we know best and that everyone else should just follow our lead.
The classic my way or the highway approach.
And it can be incredibly destructive, both to our relationships and to the organizations we lead.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we become more effective leaders while keeping our ego in check?
One key is to cultivate a sense of trust, to delegate responsibility, to empower others to make decisions and contribute their own ideas.
It's about building a team, not a dictatorship.
Exactly. And that requires humility, a willingness to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we need the input and expertise of others.
That reminds me of the contrast between Dwight Eisenhower and John DeLorean. Eisenhower, as president, was known for his organized and disciplined approach to leadership. He trusted his staff and delegated effectively.
DeLorean, on the other hand, was a brilliant car designer, but a chaotic manager. He was constantly distracted, chasing after new ideas without a clear plan for execution.
And his company ultimately imploded despite having a great product and a lot of talent.
It's a classic example of how ego can sabotage success. DeLorean's inability to manage himself, to build a cohesive team, ultimately led to his downfall.
It's a reminder that leadership is not just about having great ideas. It's about execution, about building a system that can support those ideas.
And that system requires trust, collaboration, and a willingness to let go of the need for absolute control.
So we need to find that balance between confidence and humility, between asserting our vision and being open to the input of others.
Precisely. And a great model for this kind of balanced leadership is General George C. Marshall.
Marshall, the World War II general, what made his leadership style so effective?
He embodied the antidote to what Pat Riley calls the disease of me. It's a term Riley uses to describe the egotism that can infect successful teams, and Marshall was the opposite of that.
So how did Marshall resist this disease of me?
He was humble, selfless, and always put the mission above personal gain, for instance. He actively discouraged promotions, even turning down the command of D-Day.
Turning down the command of D-Day, that's incredible. It really shows how dedicated he was to the bigger picture.
He understood that true leadership is about serving something larger than yourself. It's about empowering others, not accumulating power for yourself.
I wonder how different our world would be if more leaders embraced that kind of humility.
It's a powerful thought, and it brings us to another crucial aspect of managing success: maintaining perspective.
Perspective, what do you mean by that?
Success can be isolating.
Yeah.
It can disconnect us from the world, from the people and experiences that give our lives meaning.
It's like living in a bubble surrounded by yes men and sycophants.
And that can lead to a dangerous sense of self-importance. We start to believe our own hype and lose sight of the bigger picture.
So how do we stay grounded? How do we reconnect with the things that truly matter?
One way is to meditate on the immensity of the world, to remind ourselves that we are just a small part of something much larger than ourselves.
I love how John Muir described his experience in Alaska, that feeling of being connected to the cosmos, that awareness of the infinitesimal point of human existence within the vastness of the universe.
It's a powerful antidote to ego, which often inflates our sense of importance by connecting to something larger than ourselves. Whether it's nature history or a spiritual tradition, we gain a sense of humility and perspective.
It's like visiting a historical site standing where great figures once walked. It makes you realize that our own lives are just a small chapter in a much larger story.
Exactly. And that realization can be incredibly liberating. It frees us from the tyranny of ego, from the need to be the center of attention.
So it's about finding a sense of purpose and meaning beyond our own individual accomplishments.
Precisely. And that purpose can be a powerful source of motivation and resilience, especially when we face setbacks or challenges.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult phase of our journey, failure. But I think that's a conversation for part 3 of this deep dive. All right, so now we're going to tackle the big one.
The big one.
Failure.
Yeah.
We've explored how ego can impact like our aspirations and our successes.
Right.
But now we're like facing the ultimate test.
Yeah. Failure is inevitable. It's part of life.
It is.
And how we respond to it often reveals our true character.
When things are going well, it's easy to feel like confident and in control. But when we face setbacks, it's like our ego goes into overdrive.
That's right. When our plans crumble,
Yeah.
when we experience loss or disappointment, ego can tempt us to react in ways that are self-destructive.
It can be so hard to stay positive and keep things in perspective when you're dealing with failure.
It is.
What are some ways to avoid letting our ego sabotage us during those difficult times?
One of the most crucial steps is to separate our ego from the situation.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that failure doesn't define us. It doesn't diminish our worth or potential.
That's easier said than done, though.
It is.
When something goes wrong, it's natural to feel like a failure, to take it personally.
It is natural, but it's also incredibly unproductive.
Yeah.
Ego wants us to dwell on the past,
Right.
to wallow in self-pity, to blame others for our misfortunes.
And that can keep us stuck in a cycle of negativity, preventing us from moving forward.
Exactly. The first step is to acknowledge the failure, to own it,
Yeah.
and then to shift our focus to what we can control: our response, our attitude, and our actions moving forward.
This makes me think of Katharine Graham's story.
Oh, yeah.
She took over the Washington Post after her husband's suicide,
Right.
facing a series of seemingly insurmountable challenges.
She was thrust into a position of power without the experience or confidence she felt she needed.
Yeah.
But instead of giving in to self-doubt and insecurity, she persevered. She learned on the job, made tough decisions, and ultimately led the paper through one of the most tumultuous periods in its history.
It's such an inspiring example of resilience, of finding strength in the face of adversity.
And it highlights the importance of humility.
Right.
Graham was willing to admit she didn't have all the answers. She sought guidance and support from others, allowing her to grow and adapt as a leader.
It seems like her willingness to learn and evolve was crucial to her success,
Yeah,
especially in navigating such challenging circumstances.
absolutely. Ego often tries to convince us that we already know everything,
Right.
that we should be immune to setbacks. But the truth is, we're all works in progress.
Yeah.
We're constantly learning, evolving, making mistakes, and hopefully growing from those mistakes.
This reminds me of Malcolm X's experience in prison.
Oh, yeah.
He chose to use his time in confinement for learning and self-improvement, turning what could have been dead time into alive time.
That's a powerful example of how we always have a choice and how we respond to adversity.
You're right.
We can succumb to our circumstances, or we can use them as fuel for growth.
It's about recognizing the opportunity within the obstacle.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to see failure not as an endpoint, but as a stepping stone.
So instead of letting failure define us, we can reframe our narrative, viewing setbacks as learning experiences and opportunities to become stronger.
That's where owning our failures becomes so important. Ego wants us to blame others, to make excuses, to avoid taking responsibility for our mistakes.
But by doing that, we miss out on valuable lessons.
Think about John DeLorean's response to the failure of his car company. He denied any wrongdoing, blamed others, and ultimately made things even worse for himself.
It's interesting to contrast that with Steve Jobs.
Oh, yeah?
He was fired from Apple, the company he founded.
I know the story.
But he acknowledged his mistakes, learned from them,
All right.
and eventually returned to Apple, leading it to even greater success.
Jobs' story shows us that owning our failures, even when it's painful and embarrassing, can ultimately lead to growth and redemption.
It's about letting go of the need to be right, to protect our ego, and instead focusing on what we can learn and how we can improve.
And that brings us back to the concept of focusing on what we can control.
Yes. This reminds me of the story of Belisarius, the Byzantine general, who was repeatedly betrayed and mistreated despite his military victories.
He faced incredible injustice, yet he never became bitter or vengeful.
Mm.
He chose to focus on what he could control: his own actions, his sense of duty, and his commitment to doing the right thing.
His story shows that our internal state, our attitude, our choices are ultimately more important than external circumstances.
We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. And that response can make all the difference.
So true. It can determine whether we spiral into negativity or emerge from our failures even stronger and more resilient.
Sometimes the greatest reward comes from the effort itself.
Yeah.
The satisfaction of knowing we gave it our all, that we stayed true to our values, even when the outcome wasn't what we hoped for.
I find that incredibly comforting, especially when facing rejection or setbacks. The effort is enough.
It is. And that's a powerful message to carry with us as we navigate the inevitable ups and downs of life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into ego,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
Ego is the enemy in all stages of life.
Mhm.
It can sabotage our aspirations, corrupt our successes, and prevent us from learning from our failures.
Right.
But by cultivating humility, self-awareness, and a focus on the work itself, we can overcome these obstacles and achieve lasting fulfillment.
That's a powerful reminder that true success isn't about external validation. It's about internal growth, about becoming the best version of ourselves.
And that journey requires constant vigilance, a willingness to confront our ego, and a commitment to living a life of purpose and meaning.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's my pleasure.
I think we've all gained some valuable insights today.
I hope so.
Until next time, keep diving.